I guess I always knew my mother didn't want me. Not in the way most kids wonder about it sometimes. I mean, she really, actively didn't want me around. Even my earliest memories are tainted by her absence and indifference. "Emily, sweetie, Mommy's going out tonight. Jessica will watch you," she'd say, already halfway out the door in her designer clothes, not even waiting for my response. Jessica was just one in an endless parade of babysitters who kept me company while my mother lived her life without me. I remember my 7th birthday. Dad had planned this whole special breakfast, pancakes with whipped cream and sprinkles, my favorite. He'd gotten up early to make everything perfect before heading to work at his construction supply store. Mom was supposed to take me to the party place later that day. All my classmates were invited. I sat in my party dress for hours, waiting. She never showed up. When Dad got home that evening and found me still sitting there, trying not to cry, his face turned a shade of red I'd never seen before. "Where the hell is your mother?" he demanded, pulling out his phone. I could hear her voicemail message playing over and over as he tried calling. Finally, around 8 p.m., she breezed in, shopping bags in hand. Oh my God, was that today? I completely forgot. I was at the salon, and then Sarah called about this amazing sale. Dad cut her off. "Our daughter's birthday party, Helen." "You forgot our daughter's birthday party." "Don't be so dramatic, Robert." "We can reschedule it," she said, rolling her eyes as she headed upstairs. "Emily understands, don't you, sweetie?" I slipped away to my room during their argument, hugging my knees to my chest. Even then, I knew this wasn't normal. Other moms didn't forget their kids' birthdays. Other moms didn't spend more time with their friends than their children. Other moms showed up for school events and parent-teacher conferences, things my mother considered boring and beneath her. But I had Dad, and he was enough. He made up for her absence in every way he could. Despite running his store, he always found time for me. He'd wake up early to make my breakfast, help me with homework in the evenings, and on weekends, we'd have our special daddy-daughter adventures, trips to the park, movies, or just hanging out at home building pillow forts. I learned to stop expecting anything from my mother. When she forgot to pick me up from school, I'd call Dad. When she missed my school plays, I'd look for Dad's proud face in the audience. When she was too busy with her friends to help me shop for my first training bra, Dad awkwardly but lovingly took me himself. We were a perfect team. I had gotten used to our little family dynamic, Dad being both mother and father, while Mom floated in and out like some glamorous but distant relative who happened to live in our house. I was 15 when I got the call. It was a regular Thursday evening, and I was doing my homework, waiting for Dad to come home from the store. When the phone rang, I assumed it was him telling me he'd be late again. Instead, it was the police. "Is this the residence of Robert Thompson?" a serious voice asked. The next few minutes are still a blur in my memory. Drunk driver. Wrong lane. Head-on collision. No chance of survival. The words washed over me like ice water, but they didn't make sense. They couldn't make sense. Dad had texted me just hours ago, asking what I wanted for dinner. Mom was out with her friends, of course. The police had to call 3 times before they reached her. When she finally came home, she was already playing the part of the devastated widow, mascara artfully smeared down her cheeks. "Oh, my poor baby," she wailed, pulling me into an awkward hug that smelled of wine and expensive perfume. "We'll get through this together." The funeral was a spectacle I'll never forget, but not because of my grief, because of my mother's performance. She wore a designer black dress that probably cost more than Dad's monthly mortgage payment, and she sobbed dramatically at all the right moments. Everyone kept telling her how strong she was, how brave. "I don't know how I'll manage," she told everyone who would listen, clutching her handkerchief. "But I have to be strong for Emily now. I'll take care of her twice as much as before." Robert would have wanted that. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell everyone that she hadn't taken care of me at all before, so twice of nothing was still nothing. But I stayed silent, focusing instead on the real pain in my chest, the crushing reality that Dad was gone. The days after the funeral were even worse than I'd imagined. Mom's promises of increased attention lasted exactly 3 days. By day 4, she was too devastated to cook dinner. By day 5, she needed to process her grief at a spa day with her friends. By week 2, she was going on dinner dates to help her heal. I spent most of my time alone in my room, surrounded by memories of Dad. That's when Grandpa Jim, Mom's father, started coming around more often. At first, he just brought groceries and checked if I was eating. Then he started inviting me over to his house. "Emily, honey," he said one day, his kind eyes studying my face, "how about we make your dad's famous pancakes?" I think he'd want us to keep that tradition alive. That was the first time I'd smiled since Dad died. Grandpa's house became my sanctuary. While Mom was out rebuilding her life, her words, I spent afternoons with Grandpa, cooking comfort food, watching old movies, or just walking in the park near his house. "How are you really doing, kiddo?" he'd ask, actually listening to my answers. "What's on your mind today? Any plans for the weekend?" It was strange how my mother's father could be so different from her. He actually cared about my answers, remembered the names of my friends, and knew what was going on in my life. We'd spend hours in his kitchen, trying out new recipes or just talking about Dad. For the first few months after Dad's death, Mom seemed perfectly happy with our new arrangement. While I spent my time at Grandpa's house, she was free to pursue her social life without any guilt or interruption. That is, until people started talking. I overheard Mrs. Peterson from next door one day. "It's so sad," she was telling another neighbor. "That poor girl practically lives at her grandfather's house now. Helen's never home, always out with some new man." What kind of mother? That's when things changed. Mom suddenly started paying attention to where I was going and, more importantly, who knew about it. "You can't keep running to your grandfather's house every day," she snapped one evening when I was putting on my shoes to leave. "What will people think? That I can't take care of my own daughter?" I couldn't help but laugh. "But you don't take care of me, Mom. You never have." Her face turned red. "I am your mother. I've done everything for you." "Name one thing," I challenged her. "One single thing you've done for me since Dad died." She couldn't answer, of course. Instead, she banned me from visiting Grandpa, saying I needed to spend more quality time at home. Quality time apparently meant sitting alone in an empty house while she went on dates with her latest prospects. I told Grandpa about Mom's new rule during one of my band visits. He just shook his head and sighed. "Your mother," he said, choosing his words carefully, "has always been focused on what others think of her. Not on what's real." He patted my hand. "Don't worry about her rules, Emily. You're always welcome here." Then one day, during my senior year, Mom came home practically bouncing with excitement. "I've met someone," she announced over dinner, which was rare enough to be noteworthy. "His name is George." I barely looked up from my plate. I'd heard this before, at least 5 times in the past 2 years. There was Richard the lawyer, too boring, Michael the doctor, too busy, James the business owner, too focused on work, and several others whose names I hadn't bothered to remember. "He's different," Mom insisted, noticing my lack of enthusiasm. "He's established, mature." When I finally met George, I had to bite back a laugh. He was everything Mom had always said she couldn't stand in a man: short, overweight, and at least 15 years older than her. This was the same woman who had once broken up with a guy because he was only 5 feet 11 inches. "Isn't he wonderful?" Mom gushed after he left that first night. I studied her face, trying to understand what game she was playing now. The George I'd just met was pleasant enough, but he was the complete opposite of Mom's usual type. She'd always gone for tall, athletic men who looked like they belonged on magazine covers. The kind of men who matched her carefully cultivated image. Over the next few months, I witnessed something I'd never seen before: my mother trying to actually act like a mother. The transformation was both fascinating and disturbing to watch. "Emily, sweetheart," she'd call out when George was visiting, "would you like to join us for dinner?" The first time she did this, I nearly choked on my water. In the past, whenever Mom had boyfriends over, my role was to become invisible. "Stay in your room," or "why don't you go to a friend's house," were her usual instructions. But with George, everything was different. She'd suddenly become this picture-perfect mom, asking about my day at school, pretending to help me with college applications, even making my favorite meals, or rather, ordering them from restaurants and presenting them as homemade. "Isn't it wonderful how close Emily and I are?" she'd tell George, while wrapping an arm around my shoulders. I'd have to fight the urge to shake it off, knowing this was all just another one of her performances. One evening, she actually pulled me aside before George and his family arrived. "Emily, please, act like we're close. Like we have a good relationship. Can you do that for me?" I played along, mostly out of curiosity to see how far she'd take this charade. And she took it far, all the way to my graduation day. She showed up with George and his family, wearing a tasteful designer dress and the proud smile of a mother who'd been there every step of the way. She even brought flowers and tears and hugged me in front of everyone. "My beautiful, brilliant daughter," she gushed, making sure George and his family could hear. "I'm so proud of everything you've accomplished." The day after graduation, though, the mask came off. She waited until George had left for a business trip, then called me into the living room for a talk. "Emily," she said, her voice no longer holding any of the warmth she'd displayed at graduation. "You're 18 now, and it's time for you to move out." I stared at her, thinking I must have misheard. "What?" "I'm tired of playing mother," she continued, examining her manicured nails. "You're an adult now. You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. I put up with you for 18 years. That's enough. I want you out of the house by tomorrow." I sat there, shocked by the sudden shift, but not entirely surprised. This was the real woman behind the mask, the one I'd known all my life. Without another word, I went upstairs and started packing. Years of living with her had taught me to expect nothing, so I'd always kept my important things ready to go. Within hours, I had everything I needed in a few bags and boxes. Grandpa opened his door before I even knocked, one look at my face telling him everything he needed to know. "Your room is ready," was all he said, helping me carry my bags inside. He didn't need to ask what had happened. He knew his daughter too well. Living with Grandpa felt like finally being able to breathe after years of holding my breath. The day after I moved in, he sat me down at his kitchen table. "Emily," he said, sliding an envelope across to me. "I want you to go to college." Inside the envelope was enough money for 4 years of tuition. When I tried to protest, he held up his hand. "Your father would have wanted this," he said firmly. "And I want this." End of discussion. So I enrolled in college, determined to make both him and Dad proud. But I couldn't just sit back and let Grandpa handle everything. Despite his comfortable retirement and generous savings, it didn't feel right to depend on him completely. That's why I picked up a job as a waitress at the Silver Spoon Cafe near campus. "You don't need to work, sweetheart," Grandpa would say whenever he saw me coming home tired from a late shift. "I know," I'd reply, "but I want to." The cafe job wasn't glamorous, but it gave me enough money for books, supplies, and most importantly, little gifts for Grandpa. Nothing expensive, a new coffee mug with a silly saying, a vintage record I'd find at a thrift store, his favorite cookies from the bakery across town. His face would light up every time, not because of the gifts themselves, but because he knew they came from my own earnings. Life fell into a comfortable routine. Classes during the day, work in the evenings, weekends with Grandpa. I hadn't heard from Mom in almost 3 years, and I preferred it that way. But Grandpa still kept tabs on her through family connections. "Your mother's doing well for herself," he mentioned one Sunday over breakfast. His tone was neutral, but I could sense his disapproval. "New Mercedes, designer clothes, fancy jewelry. George seems to be quite generous." I pushed my eggs around my plate. "Good for her. She's been telling people she's paying for your college tuition, he added quietly. Says she's been supporting you financially all this time. My fork clattered against the plate. She what? Oh yes, Grandpa continued, according to her, she's been the model of maternal support. Tells anyone who'll listen about how she's helping her daughter through college. Something about this sparked my curiosity. Mom had always been status conscious, but this level of lifestyle change seemed extreme, even for her. That evening, I did something I'd never bothered to do before. I Googled George. What I found made me nearly drop my phone. George wasn't just well off, as I'd assumed. He was George Harrison III, heir to the Harrison construction empire. His family practically owned half the state. Their name was on buildings, stadiums, and charity foundations. The smallest of their annual donations to local causes was more than what most people made in a decade. Suddenly, Mom's complete personality transformation made sense. She wasn't just fishing for a wealthy husband, she was aiming for the top of the social ladder. And somehow, she'd managed to hook one of the biggest fish in the pond. The phone call came during my junior year. Seeing Mom's number on my screen after 3 years of silence made my stomach turn. Emily, baby? Her voice had that fake sweetness I remembered so well. I need you. I almost hung up, but something in her desperate tone made me listen. The wedding is in 2 months, she continued quickly, probably afraid I'd cut her off. George's family, they're very traditional. Family values mean everything to them. I need you there. I said nothing, letting the silence stretch. People have been asking questions, she went on, her voice dropping. Why doesn't your daughter visit? Why isn't she in any family photos? George's mother is particularly concerned. She keeps saying family unity is the cornerstone of their dynasty. So this is about appearances, I said flatly. No, well, not entirely. Emily, please. I'm begging you. Just come to the wedding. Show everyone we're a happy family. That's all I'm asking. My first instinct was to refuse, to tell her exactly where she could stick her invitation. But then an idea started forming in my mind. I'll come, I said. And I'm bringing Grandpa. The wedding day arrived in a blur of crystal, silk, and old money. The Harrison family had booked the most exclusive venue in the state. Watching Mom float around in her designer wedding dress, playing the role of the perfect society bride, I almost reconsidered my plan. She looked genuinely happy, greeting guests with that magnetic smile of hers, basking in the admiration of the cream of society. For a moment, I felt a twinge of guilt about what I was about to do. Then she spotted me. Emily, my darling daughter, she exclaimed loudly, rushing over to embrace me. The nearby guests turned to watch the touching mother-daughter reunion. I'm so happy you're here. I forgive you, sweetheart, for abandoning me all these years. I know you were just going through a phase, spending all that money I sent you for college on God knows what. I stiffened in her embrace, but she held on tighter. George approached us, beaming. Emily, I'm so glad you decided to make peace with your mother. She's been so worried about you. He turned to Mom with genuine concern in his eyes. I hope you can forgive her too. Parents and children sometimes struggle to understand each other. That was the moment I knew I had to go through with my plan. This kind man, and all these people, deserved to know the truth. I turned to the wedding coordinator. I'd like to make a speech before the ceremony, I said. A tribute to my mother. I stood at the microphone, my hands surprisingly steady. The elegant crowd turned to face me, champagne glasses in hand, expecting the usual loving daughter's pre-wedding tribute. Mom beamed from her seat of honor, George's hand in hers. I want to tell you all a story, I began, my voice clear and calm. A story about my mother, the bride. Not the version you'd been told, but the truth. Mom's smile flickered slightly. 3 years ago, the day after my high school graduation, my mother called me into our living room. Fortunately, I had the presence of mind to record that conversation. I pulled out my phone. I'd like to share it with you all." Before Mom could object, her own voice filled the hall. "I'm tired of playing mother. You're an adult now. I want you out of the house by tomorrow." The recording continued, capturing every cruel word, every dismissive tone. The room grew deathly quiet. "That was the last time I spoke to my mother until she called about this wedding," I continued into the silence. "She threw me out with nothing, no warning, no support. For 3 years, she hasn't called, hasn't checked if I was alive or dead. My grandfather, her father, has been paying for my college education, providing me a home, being the parent she refused to be." Mom jumped to her feet. "She's lying. Daddy, tell them she's lying." All eyes turned to Grandpa, who stood slowly from his seat. "Every word my granddaughter has said is true," he said, his voice heavy with sadness. "Helen, you abandoned your child. Just as you neglected her entire life, even when her father was alive." The great hall erupted in whispers. George's mother, a dignified woman in pearls, looked like she might faint. His father's face had turned to stone. "Is this true?" George asked Mom, his voice shaking. "Did you throw your own daughter out? Abandon her?" Mom's carefully constructed facade cracked. "I can explain." "There's nothing to explain," George cut her off, standing up. His face had transformed from confusion to disgust. "You're not the woman I thought you were. You're not the woman I could ever marry." "George, please," Mom pleaded, mascara running down her cheeks, real tears this time. "She's lying. They're both lying." "The recording doesn't lie," George said firmly. "And neither does your father." He turned to address the stunned crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize, but there will be no wedding today." Mom crumpled into her chair, her perfect world falling apart around her. The woman who had thrown me away like garbage, to chase her dreams of wealth and status, was finally facing the consequences of her actions. 2 months after the wedding that never was, I was having Sunday breakfast with Grandpa when someone started pounding on his front door. The desperate rhythm of the knocking told me who it was, before I even heard her voice. "Daddy, please, I know you're home. I need to talk to you." Grandpa and I exchanged looks across the table. He nodded slowly, and I stayed in my seat as he went to open the door. Mom burst in, designer clothes wrinkled, makeup smeared, looking nothing like the polished socialite she'd been at the failed wedding. She stopped short when she saw me, but quickly recovered, probably deciding my presence might help her case. "Daddy, I'm desperate," she began, tears already flowing. "This is all your fault, yours and Emily's. You've ruined everything." I watched her silently, stirring my coffee. The woman who'd thrown me out of my home was now standing here, playing victim once again. "I took out a loan against the house for the wedding," she continued, pacing the kitchen. "The flowers, the venue, the dress, everything was perfect. I thought once I married George, he'd help me pay it off. But now," she choked back a sob, "the bank is foreclosing. I have nowhere to go." "And this is our fault, how exactly?" Grandpa asked quietly. "If you hadn't let Emily tell those lies." "They weren't lies," I interrupted, speaking for the first time. "Every word was true. There's no point trying to deny it now." She whirled on me. "You could have waited until after the wedding. One more day, that's all I needed. One more day and everything would have been perfect." "Perfect for who, Mom?" "For you? While you continued to lie to everyone about being this amazing mother who supported her daughter through college?" "I was going to make it right," she screamed. "Once I married George, I would have had the money to actually pay for your college. I could have made all the lies true." Grandpa's laugh was bitter. "Listen to yourself, Helen. You're not sorry for what you did to Emily. You're only sorry you got caught." "Daddy, please," she switched tactics, moving closer to him. "I need help, just a loan to tide me over. I'll pay you back, I promise. I just need enough to keep the house." "No, you're not getting any money from me. Not after what you did to Emily." Not after how you've lived your life. Mom's face contorted with rage. Fine. Keep playing happy family with her. I hope you're both happy with what you've done to me. She stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. That was the last time I saw her, though we heard about her through the grapevine. She lost the house, as expected. Last I heard, she was working as a receptionist at a small real estate office, living in a tiny apartment, all her designer clothes and jewelry sold to pay debts. As for me, I graduated college last month, with honors. My first paycheck from my new job at an accounting firm went toward buying Grandpa a gorgeous vintage watch he'd been eyeing. His eyes got misty when I gave it to him. I'm saving up now for my own apartment, something close to work. Grandpa insists I can stay with him as long as I want, but I think it's time for me to stand on my own feet, my choice this time, not because someone is forcing me out. Sometimes I think about Mom, about how different things could have been if she'd just been capable of loving someone other than herself. But I've learned that you can't make someone love you, can't make them be the parent you need them to be. All you can do is cherish the people who do love you, who choose to be there for you.